You're listening to Psych with Mike. For more episodes or to connect with the show with comments, ideas, or to be a guest, go to www.psychwithmike.com. Follow the show on Twitter @PsychWithMike or like the Facebook page @PsychWithMike. Now, here's Psych with Mike.
Welcome into the Psych with Mike Library. This is Dr. Michael Mahan, and I am here with my friend and colleague, Mr. Brett Newcomb.
I'm back.
You're back.
I haven't been gone, but
You haven't been gone.
Yeah. But I'm here again.
You're here again.
Yes.
We are together again. Yeah. And if you are hearing us on the radio waves of I-10 in the Valley, the desert's positive voice, then we would love it if you would go to psychwithmike.com and drop us a note. Let us know that you're listening to us, and if there's anything that you would like to hear us talk about, we would definitely appreciate that. And if you're listening to us on the podcast or anywhere else, go to iTunes and drop us a rating and a little note as far as what you like about the show, and we would really appreciate that.
And we appreciate subscriptions.
Subscriptions, yes, always. I think everybody who listens to Psych with Mike should go on the YouTubes and just find the show, type in Psych with Mike, and subscribe and like a couple of the videos. Even if you don't normally access the show that way, just do that just out of the kindness of your heart.
And the indication that it has deep meaning for you and your relative existence.
It does, because eventually, my goal for this is not to make this the number one form of income for myself or for you. But if we did get to a point where we were making some money off of this show, I would be committed to pouring all of that money back into the show, and that would be something that would upgrade our technical presentation.
We might actually reach a level of proficiency.
Somebody who could punch the right buttons.
Yeah,
that
right.
would be
that might be good.
We were talking about that before we started today, that I just cannot figure out how to punch the right buttons.
I have no comment.
So, do I feel guilty or remorseful about that?
I don't know how you feel, but you should feel remorseful.
Why?
Because remorse is a feeling that somebody has for not having done something they thought they should do in a way they thought they should do it, or for having done something they thought they shouldn't have done. So then they feel badly about it. It comes out of the ego I, my sense of me being me. To be the Christian that I would like to be requires me to behave a certain way. If I don't behave that way, then I feel remorse. I feel sadness,
Mm-hmm.
and I look at myself and say, well, why didn't you behave that way? And I make that distinction. My wife and I actually disagree about this, because I think guilt and the perception of guilt is a manipulative behavior
Mm-hmm.
by societal systems.
Oh, I agree with that 100%.
Like the church or your parents,
Yeah.
or the government or whomever, and says, well, you did this, you're guilty, we're going to punish you. You have to feel bad, and maybe additional punishments.
And your wife disagrees with that?
She thinks, well, there's another word that we're not using, shame,
Yeah.
that comes into that.
Right.
But she thinks that it serves an anticipatory purpose,
Mm-hmm.
and that if I have learned to feel guilt and shame with regard to certain specific behaviors or desires that I might have, that I can use those feelings to guide my selection of choices, my selection of behaviors, to a better path. Whereas if I just feel remorse, I might be more ready to dismiss it and say, well, I feel bad about that,
Mm-hmm.
but not necessarily carry it forward. And she said that gives me the opportunity to get off the hook.
That remorse does?
That, yes, my rejection of the concept of guilt
Uh-huh.
as something that I internalize. I often say I don't do guilt. I may feel badly,
Right.
but guilt is a manipulative message
Right.
that the system imposes on me. And she says, maybe you should do some. Maybe there's relevance and validity for feeling guilt in some circumstances.
Well, I've always said,
If I'm quoting her accurately, which if she listens to this, she'll tell me.
she could call in.
Yeah.
I've always said the duck would then talk to us. I've always said that guilt is a manipulative tool. I've always said that in therapy, and I believe that. And I've also said that that's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, that for me, I tell people, whenever you feel guilty about anything, your job is to sit down on the spot and ask yourself, who's trying to manipulate me and what do they want? And you'll always find the root of the guilt, and that's not always a bad thing. If you feel guilty when you think about, hitting somebody in a road rage incident, and that stops you from pulling off on the side of the road and acting inappropriately, that's okay. That's great.
See, I think that's a distinction without a difference, because I've been in that situation. I've had a road rage episode about which I subsequently felt incredible remorse, but I wouldn't say that what I felt was guilt. I mean, I said, I can't believe I lost my temper. I can't believe that I allowed myself to be overwhelmed by that.
So are you
anger.
saying you pulled over or you didn't pull over?
I pulled over and cried and apologized to my wife and said, I'm sorry I frightened you. I'm sorry that I took that risk. I was an idiot. I feel badly.
But you didn't confront the other person.
No.
Yeah. And what stopped you from doing that?
They drove off.
Well, but did you, okay. See, my thing is that guilt is a manipulative process, that it stops us from engaging in behavior that would be inappropriate. Then if we feel badly after we do something, that could be guilt, or if we genuinely feel sorry, it could be remorse.
So I think we're, again, talking about a distinction without a difference.
Okay, so I think that there are a lot of synonymous terms that are used in psychology: guilt, shame, remorse, and resentment.
Right.
So let's define a little bit. Let's define the difference between those things.
If we can identify a difference. I mean, I think there is a difference. My wife disagrees. Well, I don't know if she disagrees with me on the difference, but maybe on the impact of the difference, because I have thought a lot, and especially listening to messaging from 12-step programs, step 4, about people needing to go back and check off ways in which they wounded or disappointed or failed in relationships and did what they now think is harm in those relationships to other people. And I accept that. I embrace that. I think that's a good thing to do. But I don't know that I wear the hat of guilt or shame or remorse. I just think it's a good thing to do, whatever your motivation is or whatever the label that you use to understand your motivation. My choice of labeling is to say it's genuine remorse. I feel badly that I behaved badly by my own definition of bad. I mean, I should have done this and I did that, and I feel badly. But I don't know that I carry a weight of guilt, which is to me more oppressive. And that's just my own interpretations.
But I still think, though, that you and I agree that guilt has a quality of manipulation associated with it.
Yes.
And that remorse does not.
Yes.
And I think that most people who would operate in a professional psychological capacity would probably agree with that. So your wife may have a different opinion.
Because she's not a professional.
Well, I'm not saying she's not a professional. She is obviously a very skilled professional, and she taught all of my children, and for that I am eternally grateful. So I would not say that she's not a professional. I wouldn't even say that she doesn't have a lot of knowledge of psychology. In this situation, this particular instance, we would differ, but I think most psychological professionals would agree that guilt is about manipulation and that remorse isn't, and that's where there's a distinction.
So when I start to think about this, I start to think about parenting messages that you as a parent give your children, or that society gives all children. And when I work with families that are struggling with parenting their children, one of the conversations that we regularly have is, can you make a distinction when you correct the child's behavior to say your behavior is not acceptable, but not give the message that you are bad and you are unacceptable?
Right. So that's the difference between
the
shame.
essence of you.
and guilt.
And I think it's the difference between remorse and guilt. I mean, I think that's what
Mhm.
comes out of it. So if I teach my child, you're bad because you disappointed me in some way. I expected you to do the dishes without being
Mhm.
asked. You didn't. You're a bad person. I think that's a mistake in parenting. And I think it gives that child a burden to carry that that child doesn't deserve to carry.
Mhm.
I think you teach children to recognize behavioral choices and to choose among them. But part of that recognition is there may be cost, there may be damage, there may be hurt that you do
Mhm.
to people that you care about. And so then you have to ask yourself, why did I do this and what do I want to do about it? How do
Right.
I, but if you just accept the guilt, I mean, I remember as a child, let me segue here, uh, I wrecked my father's car
Mhm.
and we only had one car. We were very poor and there was going to be money involved in getting it fixed. And my father had a history of being a really violent alcoholic guy. So when I went home, I expected the world to end.
Mhm.
Literally, I didn't know if I'd live through the night. My dad, and I still hate him for this. I mean, 70 years later, 60 years later, my dad said, "Go to bed." I told him, and he said, "Go to bed. I'll go outside and look at it later." And when I got up the next day, the car was gone. He'd taken it to the shop, and he walked home after work that afternoon. And I waited on him all day to punish me and to hurt me. And I said, "Dad, you know, I'll get a job. I'll fix the car. Tell me what it cost. And I'm sorry that I did that." And he said, "It's taken care of. Don't worry about it.
Mhm.
Did you learn something from that?" And I said, "I think so." And he
Mhm.
said, "That's all I need." He never guilted me. He never punished me. It was so atypical for the way that he parented. I mean, it
Yeah.
was the one time it really mattered, and then I couldn't let go of it
Right.
because he didn't relieve me by punishing me. So you know, if
But
you
what you're
spank
saying
your
is
kid,
that you
if you
learned more from that than had he
I
punished you.
absolutely
Yeah.
learned more from it. He behaved in a different way, but he gave me a different message. And the message was responsibility. I had to
Mhm.
internalize my responsibility. If he hit me, then it was on him because he hit me. And it was his rule.
Exactly.
And he,
And I've said that in therapy forever that people have to think about what's the difference between consequences and punishments. So if
Mhm.
you give somebody a consequence, that's giving them the opportunity to learn from their mistake. If you punish them, they can then
Dismiss it.
dismiss it, right?
Yeah.
Because
Well,
you've
I've already
in
paid the price.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and they probably disagree with the punishment and feel like that it is unwarranted, and that again gives them the opportunity psychologically to completely relieve themselves of responsibility.
But they also learn the power and dominance lesson.
Right.
And so
Well,
they learn the
but that's
lesson,
what it's about. Yeah.
become powerful, become
Right.
dominant, or this will keep happening to you.
Right. So for me, I was reading this article, and I really liked the distinction that they made between guilt and remorse, and that was that guilt is focused on the I, on the me, and remorse is focused on the other,
Okay.
on the victim, on the
Yeah.
you. And so when I feel guilty, I did something wrong, I should change, I'm not a good person. If I'm remorseful, I wounded you, Brett, and I need to find a way to be able to make that right in a way that matters to you. And that's really when we talk about in a 12-step
Right.
program, when we talk about amends, that's the difference between just an apology, I'm sorry, and an amend is that the apology is focused on me, relieving me, absolving me of guilt.
Is there something I can now do to make you whole?
Right.
Okay.
The amend is focused on the you. So the apology is focused on the me, lets me dismiss myself of guilt.
Right.
The amend is focused on the you, helps me to absolve my remorse, my debt to you for having wounded you, but it has to be in a way that matters to you. It has to be in a way that you recognize and you feel better about. That's the only way that you can absolve the remorse.
So to get the payoff of absolution,
Yeah.
do I need to care about you? What if
Care
you're a
about,
complete stranger? Do I care about you in the global sense of,
oh, if
I
I was
don't,
going to make an amend or absolve myself of the remorse?
yeah,
So if we go back to your example of the road rage,
right.
who did you wound?
I wounded my wife.
Your
I
wife.
frightened her
Right,
terribly.
right. So
Yeah,
you made the amend to your wife.
yeah.
You don't have to make the amend to the other guy.
Well, yeah, and as I said, he drove on.
So if your wife hadn't been in the car, right, and you had done that, who would you have wounded?
You know, I don't know that there would have been an immediate victim of my rage, uh, But what it required me to do is look at my behavior to say,
Mhm.
where did this come from? This loss of control. What are you not dealing with that
You wounded yourself.
I guess you could say that.
Right. And
Yes.
so sometimes we have to be able to recognize that the real victim, the person who has been wounded, is us. And we have to make that amend
I
to ourselves.
absolutely agree with you. And maybe it's stubbornness on my part, resistance, but I just don't see the parallelism between the two words, guilt and remorse. To me, are related but distinct differentials.
Well, no, I'm agreeing with you.
Okay.
Yeah, no. I'm saying that in the situation with your wife in the car,
Yeah.
you're remorseful. She's the victim. You make the amend to her. With your wife not in the car, you're still remorseful. It's just that the victim is you. I think that where people get hung up is that we don't tend to recognize when we wound ourselves.
Okay.
We don't see that. We don't pay attention to that. And then we think of it as a victimless crime. There's no such thing as a victimless crime.
Wow. You do this for a living?
Sometimes.
I feel like I should pay you some money.
Sometimes I do it for a living, and sometimes I'm even good at it.
Yeah.
But so when that happens, then it's important to identify who the victim is and make that amend to the appropriate person. Now, to the extent that I had a history when I was younger, and not even, I mean, after I was recovering, but, still younger than I am now. When my children were growing up, I had some episodes where I acted really inappropriately in a car. And I feel horribly about that. And I've gone to my children and I have begged them to absolve me and tell me that it's okay and that, they weren't permanently damaged by that. And, they tell me that, and I still am not beyond it because I haven't been able to make that amend to myself in a way that matters to me. Because I can't let go of the fact that I was that person.
Can't or won't?
Won't.
Okay.
Won't.
And I think that's important. Again, we're talking about
absolutely.
semantics.
Absolutely.
But
No, that matters.
Yeah.
And so that's why you got to think about, how do I make this in a way that is meaningful to that other person? I won't let go of this because I haven't found a way to be able to make that amend to myself in a way that matters to me.
Right. So that comes back to personal integrity again.
Yeah.
Which to me is the foundation of the concept of remorse. My ego I says, I want to be this person.
Mm-hmm.
I behave in ways that are not this person. So I want to get that straightened out. And as I understand and identify guilt, that doesn't help me do it. But if I understand and identify remorse, I truly feel badly, then I'm closer to being able to straighten it out.
Right.
Is the distinction that I make.
And I think that a lot of times it's easier to get absolution from another than it is to get absolution from the self.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
So then how do we get absolution from the self?
Well, that's an interesting conversation to have in therapy with people who are struggling with these issues. And I find that those who have a religious foundation, that it can be helpful to inquire, what does your faith, whatever your faith is, teach you about forgiveness? And do you think that forgiveness is an act of grace, or do you think it's an act of works? You have to earn it. You build up brownie points, and then you get off scot-free. You get gold stars or go to heaven. So if you don't have a religious foundation, to me it's more of an intellectual, emotional exercise.
Yeah.
If you do have a religious foundation, it's more of a surrender. If you accept the message of that foundation, then you let go of it. But so I suggest that maybe it's more self-centered and more unwilling to let go of the idea that you're the center of the universe.
Right. Well, and I think that is absolutely hitting the bullseye, because I know for myself, when I really think about this, and I don't necessarily proselytize extensively, but people who know me know that I'm a Christian and know that is really meaningful to me. And I know in my head that my concept of a higher power is all loving and all forgiving and forgives me for anything that I do, I have a problem applying that then to myself, whether it's because of this idea of ego integrity or whatever. And when I really, really think about it, what the core of that is for me is that I'm really selfish. I mean, when I hold on to those things, that's a selfish thing to do, to hold on to that. And I have to recognize that engaging in that behavior, if my child is in the car, is a selfish thing to do. That's really selfish. But then not being willing to let go of it and continue to beat myself up over it is selfish also.
Yeah.
And that's the core of it, is really being able to recognize that we have to let go of that selfishness. And for, at least for me, that's how I've been able to process it.
So anthropomorphically, identifying a higher power as a guiding, loving parent that has to release you from
Right.
those bad feelings
Right.
allows you to not feel that ownership yourself.
It does when I can remain connected to it, because that's, and your father was aggressively, even violently alcoholic.
Yeah.
My father was ignoringly,
Avoidantly
alcoholic. And I don't know which one's better or worse. I don't think that it's a competition, but both of us had that difficult relationship with our fathers. And so thinking of a higher power in terms of a parental figure is really, really nurturing for me when I can remain connected to it. But then I get really selfish and I get into myself and I think, oh, you were a bad person and you should be better than that. You've striven to be better than that. You've gone out and gotten an education and really worked hard to be a better person. And then, that's that's a cyclic argument. Well, okay, but I did this thing, so how do I stop beating myself up over it? And the only way out of that is let it go. Forgive yourself. Forgive yourself.
Well, in some respects, I think that's what the Buddhist faith teaches when they talk about the concept of nirvana.
Right.
As you move around the wheel of life towards oneness with the universe or oneness with the higher power, at each higher level, you have better vision, you understand more, and you can forgive more.
And we're going to get our friend Eric Kaufman back on, who we've talked to before, and I think that
time as a Buddhist monk.
And I think that would be a great thing for us to talk about with him, because I agree with you that Buddhist ideal of, just universal acceptance, nothing is judgmental. It's a really great concept for us to incorporate into this kind of a conversation, and I would love to have his opinion on that. So we'll ask him about that next time we talk to him.
Okay.
All right. So if anybody has any questions about this or would like to get a hold of us, you can always do that at the website, psychwithmike.com. As always, the music that appears in Psych with Mike is written and performed by Mr. Benjamin DeClue. And if it's Friday, it's Psych with Mike.